There's a problem in rural plumbing that no amount of money can solve with a big machine. The problem is access. A buried water line breaks. The break is 6 feet underground. The pipe runs under a barn, or beside a foundation, or between two buildings that are 8 feet apart, or through a root-tangled hillside where the ground slopes 40 degrees and the nearest flat spot is 200 feet away. The pipe is broken, the water is off, and the excavator, the $180,000 machine that can dig a trench 60 feet long and 8 feet deep in an hour on open ground, can't reach it, can't fit between the buildings, can't operate on the slope, can't dig beside the foundation without risking collapse, can't work under the barn, can't turn in the space, can't reach the pipe. The pipe doesn't care. The pipe is broken and the water is off. And the family that depends on it is hauling buckets from a neighbor's spring while a $180,000 machine sits at the road because it's 18 feet wide and the gap is 8. This happened on a Thursday in January of 2002 in Ritchie County, West Virginia, at the Caldwell Farm outside of Harrisville. The water line from the spring house to the main house, a 120-foot run of 1-inch galvanized pipe, buried 4 feet deep, had frozen and burst during a cold snap that dropped temperatures to 18 below zero for 3 consecutive nights. The burst was somewhere in the middle of the run, between the spring house and the house, under a section of ground that passed between the old stone spring house wall and a retaining wall that held the hillside above the driveway. The gap between the two walls was 7 feet. The pipe was 4 feet down. The ground above the pipe was frozen solid to a depth of 14 inches. The plumber, a man named Rick Sizemore, who'd been doing water and sewer work in Ritchie County for 16 years, assessed the situation and made the call that every plumber dreads making in January. "Mrs. Caldwell, I can't get to the pipe. My excavator won't fit between the spring house and the retaining wall. Even if it could fit, the ground is frozen 14 inches deep. My bucket can't break through frozen clay without risking damage to the retaining wall. And I can't dig by hand to 4 feet through frozen ground in January. The repair has to wait until the ground thaws." When does the ground thaw? Late March, early April. That's 2 months. We've been without water for 3 days. My husband's 74 and I'm 71. We can't haul water from the neighbors for 2 months. I can run a temporary line on the surface from the spring house. It'll freeze every night, below 20 degrees. But if you run it during the day and drain it at night, you'll have water during daylight hours. A garden hose in January, that's your solution. That's my solution until the ground thaws and I can get the excavator in. Helen Caldwell was not a woman who accepted garden hoses as solutions. She was 71 years old. She'd lived on this farm since 1958. And she'd been through enough West Virginia winters to know that a temporary surface line in January was a euphemism for no water. She called her neighbor. Stay with me, because the man she called and what he brought with him is why this story is about more than a broken pipe. Let me tell you about Cecil Marks, because Cecil was the neighbor who answered the phone, and the tool he brought was the reason Helen Caldwell had water by supper time. Cecil was 79 years old. He'd farmed 100 acres on the ridge above the Caldwell place since 1966. Cattle, hay, a tobacco patch in the good years, a vegetable garden that Estelle, his wife, had maintained until her death in 1998. Cecil was one of the last of a generation of West Virginia hill farmers who could do everything. Plumb a spring, wire a barn, shoe a horse, set a foundation, and dig a post hole through frozen ground with tools that his grandfather had made in a blacksmith shop that was now a chicken coop. The tool Cecil brought to the Caldwell farm was a hand auger. Not a modern post-hole auger, not the manufactured kind with chrome-plated blades and a painted handle that the hardware store sells for $45. A hand-forged auger that Cecil's grandfather, Asa Marks, had made in approximately 1918 from a piece of wagon axle, a section of plow blade, and a white oak handle cut from a tree on the same ridge where Cecil still lived. The auger was a thing of brutal beauty. The shaft was a 3-foot section of 1-inch wagon axle, solid wrought iron, straight and true, with a T-handle welded to the top from a piece of the same axle. The cutting blade was forged from a worn-out plow point. Asa had heated the plow steel in his forge, hammered it flat, and shaped it into a 6-inch cutting blade that spiraled around the shaft like a corkscrew. The blade edge was hardened, heated cherry red and quenched in oil, giving it a cutting edge that could bite into clay, rock, and frozen ground that would defeat a modern manufactured auger. The design was Appalachian. Every hill farm in West Virginia had some version of it. A hand-forged auger, made from whatever steel was available, shaped by the local blacksmith to cut the specific soil conditions on that specific hillside. Asa's auger was designed for Ritchie County clay, heavy, sticky, full of shale fragments and sandstone cobbles that would jam a manufactured blade. The spiral was aggressive, a steep pitch that pulled the clay upward and out of the hole instead of compressing it against the sides. The blade was thick, 3/16 of an inch, strong enough to shear through small roots and glance off cobblestones without chipping. Cecil had been using this auger since he was 14. He'd dug hundreds of post holes, dozens of utility trenches, and at least 20 waterline repairs with it over 65 years. The handle was worn smooth where his hands gripped it. The blade had been resharpened 50 times. The original 6-inch diameter had been ground down to 5 1/4, but the edge was still keen. The wrought iron shaft had a slight bow from decades of torque, the set of a tool that has been twisted 10,000 times by a man's arms. If you're enjoying this story, consider subscribing to The Average Farmer. We share stories like this every week. Let me tell you about what happened when Cecil walked down the hill to the Caldwell farm, with the auger over his shoulder because the plumber was still there, and the conversation that followed is the heart of this story. Rick Sizemore was loading his tools into his truck when Cecil appeared at the edge of the driveway. Cecil was carrying the auger in one hand and a 5-pound hand sledge in the other. He was wearing insulated coveralls, rubber boots, and a wool cap. He looked like what he was, a 79-year-old farmer who'd come to dig a hole in January. "Cecil," Helen said from the porch. "Helen, I heard your water's out." "The pipe burst. Rick says he can't reach it until the ground thaws in March." Cecil looked at the gap between the spring house and the retaining wall, 7 feet. He looked at the ground, frozen clay, gray-white with frost, hard as concrete for the first 14 inches. He looked at the auger in his hand. "I can reach it?" Rick Sizemore looked up from his truck. He saw the auger. He saw Cecil. He saw a 79-year-old man proposing to dig through 14 inches of frozen clay and then 3 feet of unfrozen clay to reach a pipe 4 feet underground, in a 7-foot gap between two stone walls, in January, with a hand tool that looked like it belonged in a Civil War museum. "Mr. Marks, that ground is frozen solid. You can't auger through 14 inches of frozen clay." "I've augered through frozen ground before. You break the frost cap with the sledge, crack it, not remove it. Then the auger goes through the cracks. Below the frost line, the clay is wet and workable. The auger pulls it out. 4-foot hole, 6-inch diameter. I can reach the pipe by dark." "By dark. It's 1 o'clock. You've got 4 hours of daylight." "I've done this faster, but I'm 79, so I'll take the full 4 hours." Rick looked at his excavator on the trailer behind his truck. $180,000, 18 feet wide, 36,000 pounds, equipped with a hydraulic thumb, a tilt bucket, and a GPS-grade control system. It could move 300 cubic yards of earth per hour. It could dig a trench 60 feet long and 8 feet deep before lunch. And it couldn't fit in a 7-foot gap between a spring house and a retaining wall. Cecil's auger was 3 feet long, weighed 8 pounds, and fit anywhere a man could stand. "Mr. Marks, I can't in good conscience let a 79-year-old man dig a 4-foot hole in frozen ground with a hand auger." "You're not letting me do anything." Helen called. "Her water's off. She's 71 and her husband's 74, and they can't haul water for 2 months. I've got the tool, and I've got the knowledge, and I've got 4 hours of daylight. Your conscience can wait in the truck." Everything was about to change, but Cecil had one thing the $180,000 excavator didn't: the ability to work in a space the size of a closet. Cecil walked into the 7-foot gap between the spring house and the retaining wall. He set the sledge down and positioned the auger at the point where he estimated the pipe ran, directly between the two structures, approximately 60 feet from the spring house, based on the visible pipe entry points at each end. He started with the sledge. 3 sharp blows to the frozen surface. Not digging, cracking. The 14-inch frost layer was hard but brittle. Frozen clay fractures under impact the way a ceramic tile fractures. The sledge opened cracks radiating from the impact point. Cecil swung 3 more times, widening the fractured area to approximately 8 inches in diameter. The frozen clay broke into chunks that he pried out with the auger tip and tossed aside. In 10 minutes, the frost cap was broken. A rough hole 8 inches across, 14 inches deep, through to the unfrozen clay below. The unfrozen clay was wet, gray, heavy. Ritchie County bottomland clay, the kind that sticks to everything and holds water like a sponge. Miserable to dig with a shovel, perfect for an auger. Cecil set the auger in the hole and started turning. Both hands on the T-handle, body rotating from the hips, the spiral blade biting into the wet clay and pulling it upward around the shaft. Each full rotation advanced the blade approximately 2 inches and brought a cylinder of clay to the surface. He pulled the auger out every 6 inches, the clay clinging to the spiral like soft ice cream on a cone, and knocked it off against the retaining wall. The rhythm was steady. Turn, pull, knock, replace, turn. The hole deepened. 18 inches, 24, 30. The clay got wetter as Cecil went deeper, groundwater seeping into the hole from the surrounding soil, a sign that the pipe and the spring's moisture were close. At 36 inches, the clay changed color. From gray to brown, darker, richer. The organic layer that had been the surface soil before the spring house and retaining wall had been built on top of it decades ago. At 42 inches, the auger hit something that wasn't clay. A metallic ring transmitted through the wrought iron shaft into Cecil's hands. The feel of steel hitting steel, transmitted through 84 years of forged metal. The pipe. "I've got it," Cecil said. Helen was watching from the porch. Rick was watching from his truck. Both of them heard the ring, the sound of a hand auger finding a pipe 4 feet underground through 14 inches of frozen ground in a 7-foot gap that an $180,000 excavator couldn't enter. Cecil widened the hole, augering a second hole beside the first, then a third, creating an opening approximately 16 inches across at the pipe depth. He reached down with his arm, his shoulder at ground level, his hand 4 feet below, and felt the pipe. 1 inch, galvanized. He could feel the split, a 3-inch crack in the pipe wall where the frozen water had expanded and burst the galvanized like a balloon. 3-inch split, galvanized. I can feel it. Rick, do you have a repair sleeve that fits 1 inch, galvanized? Rick did. He kept repair sleeves in every size in his truck. Stainless steel compression sleeves that clamped over a pipe crack and sealed it without needing to cut or replace the damaged section. He handed a sleeve and a socket wrench down to Cecil. Cecil worked by feel. 4 feet underground. In a hole 16 inches wide, he positioned the repair sleeve over the crack, tightened the compression bolts with the socket wrench, and sealed the pipe. The work took 20 minutes. 20 minutes of a 79-year-old man lying on frozen ground with his arm in a hole, working by touch in a space too small for anything except a human hand. At 4:15 p.m., 3 hours and 15 minutes after Cecil started, he climbed out of the gap, brushed the clay off his coveralls, and told Helen to turn on the water. Helen turned the valve at the spring house. The pipe pressurized, water flowed, no leak. The repair sleeve held. The pipe that had burst 3 days ago was sealed. The water that 2 elderly people needed to survive January was running, and the tool that had made it possible was leaning against the retaining wall, a hand-forged auger from 1918, covered in clay, the blade still keen, the handle still warm from Cecil's hands. That moment changed everything about how Rick Sizemore thought about access and tools. And Helen Caldwell, standing on her porch watching water run from her kitchen faucet for the first time in 3 days, would never forget it. Let me tell you about Rick Sizemore's reaction, because the plumber who'd said the job had to wait until March watched it get done in January with an auger from 1918. Rick was 38 years old. He'd been a plumber and excavation contractor for 16 years. He owned 2 excavators, a backhoe, a trencher, and a fleet of tools that represented $340,000 in capital investment. He could dig any trench, lay any pipe, and repair any line on open ground. His entire business model was built on open ground. The excavator needed room. The backhoe needed room. The trencher needed a minimum width of 3 feet. His tools were designed for access that the landscape provided. When the landscape didn't provide access, Rick's tools were useless. And here was Cecil Marks, 41 years older than Rick, with a tool that cost nothing, required no fuel, and fit in any space a man could stand, completing a repair that Rick's $180,000 excavator couldn't attempt. Rick didn't leave. He stood at the gap and watched Cecil work the entire 3 hours. He watched the frost-breaking technique, the sledge cracks, not the excavator bucket that would have shattered the retaining wall. He watched the augering, the steady rotation, the pull and knock rhythm, the progressive deepening that a machine couldn't replicate in a confined space. He watched the repair, the arm in the hole, feel the pipe, wrench by touch method that no mechanical arm could perform because no mechanical arm had the sensitivity of a human hand. Mr. Marks, I've been doing this work for 16 years. I've never seen anyone dig to a pipe by hand through frozen ground. My grandfather dug every water line on this ridge by hand. Every spring development, every cistern feed, every livestock water line. He dug them with this auger and a shovel in his two hands. There were no excavators in 1918. There were no backhoes. There were men and tools, and the knowledge of how to use them in the space the land gave you. The space the land gave you, that's the part my equipment can't handle. My excavator needs 18 feet of clearance. My backhoe needs 12. My trencher needs 3, and this gap is 7 feet. Your auger needs 8 inches. My auger needs 8 inches, and a man who can turn it. That's the tool specification. 8 inches and hands. I should own one of those. You should own the skill to use one. The auger's a piece of iron. Without the knowledge, where to break the frost, how to read the clay, when to widen the hole, how to feel for the pipe. The auger is a stick with a blade. The knowledge makes the tool work. The tool doesn't make the knowledge. Rick asked Cecil to teach him. Not immediately. He had jobs to finish, a business to run. But the following spring, on a Saturday in April, Rick drove to Cecil's farm with a case of beer and an afternoon free, and Cecil taught him. They started on the ridge behind Cecil's barn, where the soil was the same Ritchie County clay that had defeated Rick's excavator in January. Cecil showed Rick how to read the frost depth by the color of the surface. Dark clay for unfrozen, gray-white for frozen, the gradient between them showing the frost line. He showed him how to break the frost cap. 3 sharp blows with the sledge. Not a continuous hammering that compacts the clay instead of cracking it. He showed him the augering technique, rotation from the hips, not the arms, using body weight instead of muscle. The steady rhythm that could sustain 4 feet of depth without exhaustion. And he showed him the feel. The way the auger transmits information through the shaft. The grind of gravel, the softness of clay, the sudden density of a root, the metallic ring of a pipe. The auger is your finger, Cecil told Rick. You're reaching into the ground with a 3-foot steel finger. Everything the blade touches, you feel in your hands. The clay tells you what it is. The pipe tells you where it is. You just have to pay attention to what the handle is saying. Rick bought a hand auger that week. Not a manufactured one, but a hand-forged one that Cecil helped him find at a farm auction in Calhoun County. It was similar to Cecil's. Wagon axle shaft, plow blade spiral, white oak handle. Different smith, different farm, same design. The Appalachian Standard, repeated across 1,000 homesteads by 1,000 blacksmiths who all solved the same problem the same way. Rick added the auger to his truck. It sits behind the seat, wrapped in a canvas sheath, next to a 5-pound sledge. He uses it 3 to 4 times a year, always in confined spaces, always where the excavator can't reach, always in situations where a $180,000 machine is parked at the road while a $75 hand tool does the work. Let me tell you about the JD dealer, because Wayne Cutright enters this story with the same blind spot every equipment dealer has: the assumption that bigger is always the answer. Wayne ran the equipment side of the John Deere franchise in Parkersburg, 30 miles west of Harrisville. He sold and rented excavators, backhoes, skid steers, and compact track loaders. His business was access. He sold machines that accessed underground utilities, accessed building foundations, accessed anything buried that needed to be reached. Wayne heard about Cecil's repair at a contractor meeting in March. Rick told the story: the frozen pipe, the 7-foot gap, the 79-year-old farmer, the 1918 hand auger. The room was quiet for the wrong reason, not admiration, but discomfort. These were men who sold and operated heavy equipment. A story about a hand tool outperforming their machinery was not the kind of story they told at meetings. Wayne's response was predictable. The solution for confined space access is a compact excavator. The JD35G fits in a 6-foot gap. It weighs 8,200 pounds. It can dig to 8 feet. Rick should have called me for a rental, instead of letting a senior citizen dig through frozen ground with a relic. The 35G weighs 8,200 pounds, Rick said. The retaining wall beside the spring house is dry stacked limestone. If I put 4 tons of machine next to a dry stacked wall on a 30-degree slope in January, the wall collapses. And if the wall collapses, the hillside follows. And if the hillside follows, the spring house goes with it. Cecil's auger weighs 8 pounds. It doesn't threaten the wall. It doesn't threaten the slope. It doesn't threaten anything except the clay between the surface and the pipe. 8 pounds versus 4 tons. Same pipe. Same result. Same result. Different risk. The excavator can do more damage in one pass than Cecil's auger can do in a lifetime. That's not an argument for the excavator in a confined space. That's an argument against it. Wayne didn't push the point. The math was against him. An 8,200-pound machine next to a dry-stacked wall on a slope in winter was a liability, not a solution. An 8-pound auger in the hands of a man who knew how to use it was the solution. 0 risk, 0 damage, 0 liability, 1 repaired pipe. Wayne drove to Cecil's farm a month later. Not to sell anything. There was nothing to sell to a man who farmed 100 acres with a Farmall 560 and didn't own a piece of equipment newer than 1974. Wayne came because the story had stayed with him, and he wanted to see the auger. Cecil showed him. He unrolled the canvas wrap and laid the auger on the tailgate. Wayne picked it up. 8 pounds of wrought iron and hardened plow steel, shaped by a blacksmith in 1918, resharpened 50 times, the handle worn to a polish that no manufactured tool could replicate because polish comes from time and use, not from a factory. Your grandfather made this. Asa Marks, 1918, from a wagon axle and a plow point. He made 7 of them, 1 for each of his sons and 2 spares. Mine is the only one I know of that's still in use. I sell equipment that costs $50,000 to $200,000. This tool is worth what? The steel value? $20? The steel is worth $20. The knowledge of how to use it is worth the pipe it reaches. Helen Caldwell's pipe was worth 2 months of water to a 74-year-old man and a 71-year-old woman in January. What would you charge for that? Wayne set the auger down carefully. The way you set down something that's older and more capable than you expected. I sell access, Wayne said. That's my business. Excavators access things underground. And this 8-pound auger accessed something that my most expensive machine couldn't reach. Because your machines need room. My auger needs a man. Room is expensive. You have to clear it, grade it, manage it. A man is free. A man fits anywhere. A man can feel what the machine can't feel and reach what the machine can't reach. The auger just makes the man's hand longer. Let me tell you how this ends. Cecil Marks used the auger until 2005 when he was 82. His hands still worked. His back did not. He passed the auger to Rick Sizemore, the plumber who'd watched him dig through frozen ground to a burst pipe on a January afternoon. Rick keeps it behind the seat of his truck, wrapped in the same canvas Cecil wrapped it in, next to the sledge that breaks the frost. Rick has used the auger on 23 jobs since 2002. Every one of them was in a space too confined for his excavator. Every one involved a pipe or utility that a machine couldn't reach because the buildings, the walls, the slope, or the terrain wouldn't allow the machine within working distance. 23 repairs, 23 families with water. 23 times an 8-pound hand tool did what $180,000 of hydraulic machinery could not. Cecil died in 2008 at 85. The funeral was at the Baptist Church in Harrisville. Helen Caldwell was there. She was 77. She'd been using the water that Cecil's repair provided for 6 more years. 6 more winters, 6 more Januaries, the repair sleeve still holding. The pipe that burst in 2002 still sealed by a compression fitting that a man had tightened by feel 4 feet underground with one arm in a hole. Rick spoke at the funeral. He didn't tell the pipe story. Helen was there, and he didn't want to make her cry. He told a different story. He told about the afternoon in April when Cecil taught him to use the auger. The rotation from the hips, the pull and knock rhythm, the feel of the handle transmitting what the blade was touching underground. He said Cecil had given him 2 things, a tool and a way of thinking about access that his business school education had never considered. Cecil taught me that access isn't about the size of the machine. Access is about the size of the space. When the space is big, use the big machine. When the space is small, use the small tool. And when the space is smaller than any machine, use the smallest tool there is, a man with a hand auger and the knowledge of how to read what the handle tells him. The Farmall 560 is in Cecil's barn. Dean, Cecil's grandson, farms the 100 acres. The blacksmith shop where Asa forged the auger in 1918 is now a tool shed. The forge is cold, the anvil is rusted, but the building stands. Dean keeps his grandfather's spare tools in it, the hand tools that Asa made and Cecil maintained, and that represent a century of Appalachian problem solving in forged steel and white oak. If this story stayed with you, subscribe to The Average Farmer for more. We'll see you in the next one. The excavator needed room. The auger needed a man. The pipe needed to be reached. And the man with the auger reached it, while the machine with the room requirement waited at the road. $180,000, 18 feet of clearance, 36,000 pounds. Parked, 8 pounds, 8 inches. One man. Done by dark. Because access isn't about what the machine can do. Access is about where the machine can go. And in the places where machines can't go, the only tool that works is the one that's been working since before machines existed, a man, a handle, and a blade that fits in the space the land gives you.